Well, all right, kiddos, it's time to sharpen up those edges and grease up your chains. We are going to live it up with mountain life. Dropping in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How's it going, mountain lifers? Welcome to Live It Up with Mountain Life. Thanks for listening. One of the perks of being a journalist is getting to call up total strangers and ask them whatever you want. And after reading multiple books by Adam Shoalts, I've always wondered why he picks the hardest canoe routes in the country, why he stubbornly travels upriver, and where his sheer determination comes from. So getting to speak with Shoalts was a real honor. We'll get into that in a minute here. But first, here's a word from our partner. For almost 40 years, the Jack Wolfskin name and paw print have been a symbol of their trailblazing spirit and regard for nature. Since 1981, they have led the pack with innovative, eco-conscious technologies, a commitment to social responsibility, and forward-thinking designs. If you haven't seen the Jack Wolfskin paw print before, it's because they have only just completed their newest den here in North America. Jack Wolfskin will see you in the wild, wherever that is for you. Professional adventurer, explorer, and national best-selling author Adam Shoalts is an absolute beast of outdoor adventure. Making first descents down untamed rivers in the western Hudson Bay lowlands, crossing the Arctic by canoe, or traveling by human power from southern Ontario to the Arctic, he's done it all. Beginning as a newspaper columnist, he's mapped rivers, led expeditions for the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, tracked endangered species, worked on archaeological digs, and so much more. With a master's and a PhD, his research combines an interest in nature, history, archaeology, and geography. Never one to sit still for long, we tracked him down in Port Dover, Ontario, where he just finished writing his latest book, Where the Falcon Flies. Here's my conversation with Adam Shoalts. Adam Shoalts, welcome to Live It Up with Mountain Life. Thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Oh, it's going very well. It's my pleasure to join you on the podcast.
Yeah, cool. So where are you right now?
I'm in Ontario.
Yeah, whereabouts?
I'm near Port Dover because I'm actually doing a talk tonight.
Okay.
Port Dover Lions Club. Actually, this is a busy week for me where I'm on the road, traveling around Ontario doing a bunch of different guest speaking at high schools, elementary schools, Lions clubs, Probus clubs, Queen's University. This Saturday is Earth Day, so I'm going to be in Mattawa at the Canadian Ecology Center in Samuel du Champlain Provincial Park,
Wow.
speaking there as part of a fundraiser. I'm doing another fundraiser for a nonprofit canoeing organization that aims to get kids in canoes in the outdoors in Meaford, Ontario. I'm speaking at the Woodstock Public Library, another high school down there. So yeah, I'm really on the road traveling a lot
Wow.
these 2 weeks.
Wow. I just bought tickets this morning for your event in Meaford, so I'll see you there.
Oh, did you? Well, very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Cool. So where is home? Do you have somewhere you call home these days?
Well, I live in Norfolk County,
Okay.
which is on Lake Erie's North Shore.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And you just finished your latest book, Where the Falcon Flies. What's that one about?
I just finished writing it, but it
Okay.
hasn't been published. It won't be published until October 3rd is when it's going to be in stores. Just finishing it up. I was actually just before you contacted me, doing some proofreading and laying out the final maps and the final photos for the book. This book is another adventure book, so it's about a journey I did last summer from Lake Erie, from my doorstep, in fact, to the Arctic, which was 3,400 kilometers and took just over 3 months to complete.
Wow. Is that a canoe trip?
It's a canoe trip, but involved quite a lot of hiking as well.
Yeah.
Some really long hiking. So I felt like that's when you reach almost 1,000 kilometers of hiking, that's not really portaging. It almost becomes hiking in and of itself, but mostly by canoe.
Yeah.
I started on the Great Lakes, so I canoed through Lake Erie, down the Niagara River, portaged around Niagara Falls, which was quite a lengthy portage because I had to get around the falls itself, the hydro intake, as well as the Whirlpool Rapids, and then
Yeah.
down the rest of the Niagara River, all the way around Lake Ontario, which was close to 500 kilometers to get me to Kingston and the Thousand Islands, then down the St. Lawrence River, into Quebec, past Montreal, past Trois-Rivières, past Quebec City, out to the Gulf where it gets salty. From there is when I started hiking because of all the hydro dams. Almost every major river that
Yeah.
drains into the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Quebec has been dammed, and not just ordinary dams, but in many cases like massive dams the size of a skyscraper, with a lot of fencing and other obstacles that kind of make canoeing impossible. So I had to get around all the hydro dams, work my way north over the Laurentian Mountains to Quebec. Then I canoed across the Labrador Plateau, north over the height of land, over the watershed divide, and then north all the way out to the salt water of Ungava Bay, up on the Arctic coast to end my journey.
Wow. When you say hiking, is that hiking with a canoe on your head, or did you leave the canoe behind or something?
I left the canoe behind,
Yeah.
in a little tiny village on the north shore of Quebec. I didn't really have any plan, but I was sort of counting on the goodwill and of anyone I randomly crossed paths with. And fortunately, that never failed me. Every single person I crossed paths with on this journey showed me nothing but kindness and enthusiasm and eagerness to help. So when it came time to leave my canoe behind in Quebec, I simply found the first person on a tractor. It was kind of a rural area, a small little village, and he didn't speak any English. My French is pretty rusty, but I was able to make clear what I was after, which was, can I leave my canoe here? Would you, keep it safe while I'm gone for the next several months? I anticipated it'd be at least 2 more months of my journey. And, nicely enough, this individual had a horse farm and said, I can put it in my barn. So I left my canoe in the barn, hiked north. When I got to Labrador, my plan was just find another canoe and canoe the remaining distance, which would be close to 1,500 kilometers to the coast of Ungava Bay. I figured it's Canada, so it can't be that hard to find a canoe. They're going to be like everywhere.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was easy as could be, like literally right there, two canoes lying overturned in some grass. And I just made a few inquiries very quickly. Turned out belonged to this guy, Ken. He sold me a canoe, used one, which was perfect for what I needed. And that was my canoe that I used for the remainder of my journey.
Wow. Was it I mean, did you have a choice on a good canoe? Was it like a fiberglass or was it?
He had two canoes, and
Yeah.
one was fiberglass, but the other one was an Old Town Tripper,
Okay.
which was very good. It was very close to my actual canoe that I use on expeditions. It was made of ABS Royalex, so nice and tough.
Yep.
15 and a half feet long, pretty much the canoe I would have wanted all along, except it was a little on the heavy side, weighed close to 90 pounds,
Yeah.
which is heavy when you're
Yeah.
doing bushwhacking across Labrador with no trails, no paths, bushwhacking, that sort of thing. So that was the only downside, but I was happy to take that canoe because at least it wasn't fiberglass. At least I didn't have to worry about it puncturing in whitewater rapids or something like that. So it worked out quite well.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. How did you get into this as a career?
As a career, well, I think I always just from the earliest age loved the outdoors. I loved exploring nature. I love the forest. I mean, I grew up with the forest right in my backyard. So every chance I got, my brother and I were out in those woods making shelters, sleeping under the stars, trying to make fire without matches. And I fell in love with all of that, which I suppose many kids do all across Canada. But when I got a little bit older, when I was in high school, I started to think, well, what am I going to do for a job? What am I going to do for a career? I was lucky when I was a teenager, just after 11th grade, I had a summer job working for the Ministry of Natural Resources as a ranger. So I started to think, well, maybe I could make that my career, and become a park ranger, because that was the only real job I could think of that pays you to live outside in the forest.
Yeah.
So in Ontario, at least on the high school curriculum for public schools, anyways, they have career studies class, which they still have, because when I was at a guest speaker at a high school last week, I asked them, do you still have to take grade 10 career studies? And they said, yes, you do. And when I was in the 10th grade, I said, okay, I'm going to be a park ranger. That's what I'm going to do my end of the year report on. And that was sort of the rough plan I had in my head, but I was always interested really in long journeys and expeditions and writing as well. I was a bookworm. I love to read books, especially books about the wilderness. And I thought about writing, but I didn't really know if I could make a living doing that. I thought maybe in the beginning it would just be something I did for passion as a supplementary thing. But
Yeah.
lucky enough, as I got into my 20s, I moved away from the whole park ranger thing and just did expeditions on a shoestring budget, funding it out of my own pocket, writing on sort of a piecemeal basis, freelance here and there. But it seemed people enjoyed my stories. And I started to get funding and sponsorships from organizations like the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. And by the time I was 27 or so, it became my full-time occupation. And I've been doing it ever since. So it's been almost 10 years as making my career as an adventurer, explorer, as a writer in the wilderness.
Wow, cool, man. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Fenwick, Ontario, which
Okay.
is a little small community, mostly rural in the heart of the Niagara region. So it's actually got a lot of really amazing forests here, some old growth forests with like ancient trees, really rare trees that you don't often see in Canada. Carolinian species like shagbark hickory, um, black walnut, tulip trees, Canada's only native magnolia, cucumber magnolia, giant tulip trees. I mean, some of the tallest trees in Canada, east of British Columbia. So it really sort of sparked in me this great love and fascination with forests, in the outdoors.
Amazing. So your books, I mean, I haven't read them all yet, but I'm going to. I love them. I'm always just sort of questioning your sanity for page after page, and I know you get that a lot. Um, I read Alone Against the North, I guess a couple years ago, and it seemed like you just kind of chose like the worst part of the country to go do a trip in. The western lowlands of Hudson's Bay, that's where it was, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're not far off the truth, I would say, because of all the ecosystems in Canada. I mean, that's one of the great things about Canada. I mean, the natural world here is incredible, but we're blessed with a lot of diversity. Everything from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific Northwest rainforest, which is the largest temperate rainforest in the world, to the Great Plains in Saskatchewan, which is totally different, to the high Arctic, the subarctic, the boreal forest, the Carolinian forest in southernmost Ontario that I just mentioned, which has amazing broadleaf tree species, the Acadian forests on the East Coast. I mean, we have a little bit of everything. There's areas that are perfect for canoeing, like the Canadian Shield. That's your classic group of seven landscape with beautiful granite rocks and deep blue lakes. That's a canoeer's paradise. And then there's the Hudson Bay lowlands, which is not what anyone really thinks of as a destination you want to go spend your summer in because it has the world's highest concentration of mosquitoes and black flies. And this is also the biggest wetland in North America, third biggest wetland in the world. So there's not a lot of solid ground even to put up a tent. But that was the area that I really became fascinated in while I was still a teenager. And I made my first trip there when I was just 18.
Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, it was a very harsh environment in terms of a scarcity of tree cover. Most of it is not even forested at all. It's just sort of open, windswept muskeg or quicksand, as I like to call it, Canadian quicksand. There's tree cover mostly just along the riverbanks where it's a little more sheltered, but inland it just gets a little too swampy for that. And yeah, just loaded with bugs from about June to the end of August. The mosquitoes and blackflies are just so intense there that it's literally impossible not to inhale them simply
Wow.
hiking or paddling around because the sky can be filled with them. So that is the biggest drawback that most people see of that area. That is just really, really buggy. I mean, all across northern Canada, from the Yukon to Labrador, the bugs are very, very bad
Yeah.
in the brief summer. Everywhere you go, they are bad. And people who are not familiar with Canada's north are often shocked when they experience it for the first time, not realizing just how intense the mosquitoes and the blackflies can be in the summer there. But the Hudson Bay lowlands, because the entire area is just filled with water, about 80% of it is actually fresh water. Just has the maximum amount of blood-sucking insects you can imagine. I mean, the mosquitoes and blackflies being the worst, but they're also deer flies, sand flies, horse flies, just a whole lot of flies that like to suck your blood.
Sounds like a good time. Plus polar bears.
Mm-hmm. In the most northern part of the lowlands, there's a lot of polar bears. In fact, the most southern population of polar bears in the world, down around 55 degrees north latitude. And these polar bears, unlike most polar bears, because they live at such southern latitudes, have to spend a decent amount of time on land. Normally, polar bears are marine animals. They live almost their entire lives out on the sea ice hunting seals, but these ones spend a considerable amount of time in places you wouldn't really imagine a polar bear, like down in the spruce forest or on the shore, all the way from about July through October into November until the ice comes back. So that adds another dimension to any sort of canoe journey, especially one alone into that area, because there's a lot of hungry polar bears just waiting around for anyone to come by.
Good times. I love that book because it felt like your gear, it seemed like you're a bit of a dirtbag on that trip. Your gear didn't seem appropriate for the trip.
Well, I had almost no money.
Yeah.
So that book covers expeditions I did between the age of 22 through 27. And especially, I mean, all through that 5 year stretch, but especially in the early part, I had no money and I just had to make do with whatever I got. Like the rain jacket I wore for those expeditions was given to me for free from one of my uncles who happened to play in like some charity golf tournament, and that was like the draw prize. Like, here's a
Okay.
cast off jacket. He gave it to me when I was a teenager, and I wore that thing for like 10 years.
What
All
kind
my
of
other
jacket was it?
clothing, it was just like an ordinary jacket. Like, I
Yeah.
think it was probably just one of those ones that's like mass produced by some company. And because it's so cheaply made, anyone can just have like their logo
Right.
embroidered on it. So for like
Right.
something like a charity event, they would just put the name of the contest on it. So it was very, very basic, not made out of any high quality synthetic material like Gore-Tex, certainly nothing like that. I mean, I remember thinking at that time that Gore-Tex was like some sort of advanced technology, like something out of Lord of the Rings that you could read about but never aspire to actually own. It
Right.
just the jackets were so expensive. I think the price has come down a little bit, and I have Gore-Tex jackets now, but at that time it was like, oh, those jackets are impossibly expensive. And then everything else I had was very basic. My canoes were homemade. My father and I would build cedar strip canoes or fiberglass canoes, or I would get canoes for free from people who would be like throwing them out because it'd be like, this canoe's 40 years old and it's been patched 100 times, like there's nothing left of it. And I'd be
Yeah.
like, I'll take it and I'll repair it and I'll use it. And all my other gear was like, just from Canadian Tire or wherever I could pick it up. A lot of it was just secondhand. I'd buy it at garage sales or what have you. But in a way, I have to say now I've had Mech, I've had Novacraft Canoe, I've had Columbia Sportswear sponsor my expeditions. But looking back on those journeys, I honestly think I had more fun and just enjoyed it, um, making do with whatever I had when you didn't necessarily have the best gear, but your enthusiasm sort of made up for the difference, and you just, in a way, enjoyed it all the more, being out there in the rain and the elements and making do with whatever you had. There was
Yeah.
something about it that was very simple and old fashioned, that I really enjoyed.
I love that. I mean, your trips in your 20s are supposed to be like that, right? You're supposed to have crappy gear that is the only thing you can afford and it sucks, but you're young and you suck it up.
Yeah, I honestly started to worry when I was like 30 and I had a decent 10. I was like, oh no, I might be going soft. Now I'm using a thermarest. In the old days, I would never use a thermarest.
Well, I think
I
I
started to
think it
worry
only
about it.
gets worse as we get older, I think.
Yeah.
You went over waterfalls on that trip too, didn't you? Or one of
Well,
those
one
trips?
waterfall.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that was a 2012 expedition to map a river. And it was a combination of a lot of circumstances that led to that moment. One of which is at that time I was just so utterly busy that I don't even know when I found time to sleep. I'd been doing archaeological digs in Ohio. I was working on my PhD. I was writing for Canadian Geographic. I was mounting expeditions everywhere from British Columbia to the Arctic, running around, and had this one river I really wanted to go back to. I went to it, and because it's in the Hudson Bay lowlands, for the most part, it's swampy, a fairly flat landscape, so you don't really expect waterfalls, especially on a river that's very narrow and shallow. But this one was kind of hidden. It was like an S bend or a bunch of meanders above it with like rapids, but small rapids, like shallow ones. And then all of a sudden, a waterfall, which I went over in my canoe, and the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. Um, is was that like your worst moment in the wild? Do you know?
Oh no, well,
No?
no, I don't think so. Especially now,
What
that
come
was.
what comes to mind as your worst moment in the wild?
I never really think of having worse moments. I think of all
Yeah.
the ones I like. But
Yeah.
I mean, I've had lots of dangerous encounters. I've had lots of close calls. Probably the ones that I find the scariest, though, are the ones that people just sort of forget about. But it's just the raw power of Mother Nature when there are storms. Like I've camped in a tornado before, which was horrifying. But just many times I've been in lightning storms or gale force winds. I mean, you can have winds up to 100 kilometers an hour on the Arctic tundra, and that's just a very scary place to be when you're in a tiny little tent by yourself, and your metal tent poles are like the highest structure on the Arctic tundra for miles.
Yeah.
So I usually just say, like, dealing with the elements, storms, are some of the scariest things I face, especially high winds. High winds on cold bodies of water, uh, that is a real challenge. I mean, just on my most recent journey, forgetting about the far north for a second, canoeing on Lake Erie in April when the water temperature was frigid, that was a real challenge because Lake Erie, I mean, it has some really big storms. It can have huge white caps, and there's a lot of human-made obstacles along the lake that actually make it harder than if it was a wild place because you don't necessarily have the safety of a beach or a shoreline that you can simply land on in cases where there's artificial shoreline, which is nothing but steel break walls
Hmm.
or concrete break walls. So instead of like the waves just hitting a beach and naturally sort of dying, they're hitting these vertical walls and ricocheting back out. So it's making the water twice as rough as otherwise would be the case. And there were some places along the St. Lawrence River or along Lake Ontario where the weather would be getting stormy. I would have thunder and lightning, and the shoreline would be nowhere I could land a canoe because it's like nothing but private property. And all
Yeah.
the private property to prevent erosion, they've all constructed break walls in the form of steel barriers because they don't want their very expensive properties to erode. So there's
Wow.
nowhere you
Yeah.
can land. I mean, I was amazed. I was kind of interested as well, just looking at all the ways that people had devised to launch their boats. Like people have really elaborate hydraulic systems
Right.
along these break walls to lower like large power boats
Yeah.
into the water. But of course, for canoeists in a storm, that is of no help whatsoever. So sometimes I have to go on for a very long way before I could even find a spot to land when the weather got rough. I remember a few storms, one near Cornwall, Ontario, where the river is quite wide. It's actually not even really called a river there. It's called a lake because it widens out. But there was a big lightning storm that struck there, and I had to canoe a long way before I could find anywhere to land. The only place I could find to land was a Catholic church. And even there, it wasn't really a good landing place because they throw in like all kind of old concrete slabs into the water as a sort of crude break wall. I had to land on those, drag my canoe up, and just like huddle under a willow tree in the grounds of this church with a cemetery and wait for a storm to pass before I could relaunch my canoe and continue paddling. So there were all sorts of challenges like that. I don't want to say
Yeah.
they're necessarily my worst experiences because there's always a positive with the negative, but yeah, those are some of the most daunting experiences I guess I would face as a canoeist.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I tell everyone I know they need to read A History of Canada in 10 Maps. That book's so good. It's such a cool way to learn Canadian history. How'd you come up with that sort of concept?
Well, I always loved Canadian history. I mean, I said already I was a bit of a bookworm, so I used to just consume books, read them all the time. Ever since I was like 12 or 13 is when I really got into reading Canadian history. I remember being in seventh grade reading Farley Mowat, Pierre Burton, and Peter C. Newman, and continue to read. And the journeys I did in Canada's wilderness would inspire me to want to learn more about the history of these places, the fur trade, the voyageurs, the First Nations, the Coureur de Bois, the explorers. So I studied it as in depth as possible. I mentioned already that I was doing archaeological digs, which was all just part of sort of broadening and deepening my appreciation and understanding of the history. And to really, I mean, I always thought Canadian history could be told in a totally different way than what it was taught in school. How it was taught in school was often very dry, very boring. And I thought, oh, if you looked at it from a different perspective, you could actually see this as like a grand epic story, this huge epic adventure that would be fascinating if it was told from that perspective. And I guess what sort of really sharpened my perspective was studying not Canadian history, but the history of other places. I studied Central American history, Mayan history, Latin American history, European history, ancient history. I would study Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, and I'd sort of learn from studying other places how history had been looked at there, how it had been put together, sort of the big bird's eye perspective of everything. And I wanted to take an approach to Canadian history that would be quite different. So I saw maps as something that were really cool, fascinating, these old maps from explorers. But I said, I don't want to write a book about maps, even though it's going to have maps in the title. I want it to be the story behind the maps, the flesh and blood characters, the real people who brought these maps to life, to tell their stories and to sort of portray them as real people with personalities, people who you could relate to, whether you like them or loathe them. I wanted them to be like fully drawn people, characters, like Alexander Mackenzie, David Thompson, Samuel du Champlain, really bring them to life. So that was the approach I used to write that book. And I really, I gave it my all. Didn't know if anyone would read it. I thought that maybe people would just think it was boring and that nobody would ever gravitate towards the book. But to my own surprise, it seemed to resonate with people. And if I had a dime for every time someone sent me an email or an Instagram message saying, I love this book. This is the history I wish I'd been taught in schools, or this should be mandatory in schools across Canada. That's always very gratifying to hear that, because that's essentially what I intended. I wanted it to appeal to people who otherwise maybe found history boring or not that interesting. But when I hear like they thought it was interesting and fascinating, and they were drawn into it as like a page turner where they didn't know what's going to happen, I have to get to the end of this chapter. That's music to my ears. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a note here. I think, yeah, kids should have to read it in school. It should be mandatory. It's a good one, man.
Thanks.
Yeah. I just finished, I think a couple days ago, I just finished reading Beyond the Trees. So that's your journey across the Arctic. I think you estimate you paddled and portaged 4,000 kilometers.
Just under 4,000 kilometers. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, how do you look at a map and figure, yeah, I can travel up the Mackenzie River for however many kilometers you went up?
Well, when I looked at the map of northern Canada and dreamed up this idea of doing a journey alone across Canada's Arctic by canoe, it was sort of a daunting prospect, because I knew that's a heck of a lot of geography to try to cover in a canoe alone, when you're going to be facing ice, you're going to be facing adverse winds, and above all, it's going to be a race against the calendar, because even today, with warmer average temperatures, the ice-free season at those latitudes in Canada's Arctic is not very long. Many of those lakes are still ice covered in July, and by the end of September, the weather has deteriorated to the point where canoeing is no longer really feasible at all. A lot of people would tell you it's not really feasible beyond August. It's getting cold, it's getting snowy, and eventually the lakes and the rivers are simply going to ice over. So all of this was in my head when I was looking at maps and trying to dream up some sort of strategy, some sort of plan that would give me my best chance of pulling this off. And the number of theoretical routes you could take from point A to point B is literally infinite. You could come up with just countless ways of doing it, because there are literally thousands of rivers, creeks, lakes. There's just so many of them. And every one of them has, in turn, dozens of bays and other tributaries. So the number of possibilities where, you can go left here, you can go right, or I'll connect to this creek, or maybe I'll go to this river. It just multiplies one on top of another. So what I was looking for was, well, what is the route that would give me the best chance of pulling this off? And I had to consider
And
everything.
what sort of was the goal, like to follow the Arctic Circle line, or?
I didn't really have a goal beyond the trees.
Yeah.
I was going beyond the trees, as the title of the book suggests, which is the tree line. If you look at the tree line, if you just Google tree line northern Canada, you can see a crude estimate of where it is roughly from the coast of Hudson Bay all the way over to Alaska. And the tree line is more or less the natural boundary between the Arctic. North of the tree line, permafrost prevents trees from taking root, so you have Arctic tundra and characteristic Arctic species, Arctic conditions. South of it, you have boreal forest. Of course, on maps, it looks very clear cut. In practice, the tree line in a lot of places is not really a line. It's more like blurry, where it's patchy. But that was basically where I was aiming. And the Arctic Circle kind of corresponds to it, but not really.
Okay.
Because the Arctic Circle is a perfect line. And of course, in the real world, ecology doesn't follow perfect lines. So as you get closer to Hudson Bay acts like a giant freezer, and it cools off everything around it. So then you have like Arctic conditions well south of the circle. And in the far west, because of other climatic conditions, you can have trees that don't really look that different from northern Ontario growing well north of the Arctic Circle. But roughly, I had the Arctic Circle in mind. I had the tree line in mind. And I said, okay, well, I want to go from the Yukon to all the way over to the Hudson Bay watershed. So that was basically the rough idea I had. And then I looked at practical considerations, right? I didn't have an endless amount of money. I mean, I had a little more funding than I did when I first started, but I still had to consider how am I actually going to mount this expedition from a cost perspective. How do I actually get there? It's not like I can hire a helicopter. That would break the bank. I don't have that kind of money to hire a helicopter or even to charter my own aircraft to get there. So I had to look, what is actually there in terms of infrastructure, roads, towns that I can use as a jumping pad to begin my expedition and as an endpoint where I'll end it. And I zeroed in on the Dempster Highway, which is actually the only road in Canada, at least as of 2017, when I did my journey, where you can actually get in a vehicle and drive yourself to the Arctic Circle. So the Dempster Highway, I mean, the name highway is a little misleading. It's not really what most people would imagine as a highway. It's just a dirt road through the wilderness. And it winds hundreds of miles north of Dawson City in the Yukon, all the way up beyond the Arctic Circle. And then it continues to Inuvik. And then after my journey, not at that time, at that time, Inuvik was the end of the road, but in the years since, they've expanded the road. And now it goes all the way to Tuktoyaktuk. But anyways, at the time, the point was that was the only way I could really get to the Arctic Circle with my canoe and my gear in an affordable way, because all I had to do was get in a car and I could drive there and set off from the Dempster Highway right on the Arctic Circle. So it was like just a natural, beautiful, logical starting point, especially keeping costs in mind. And it's in the far west, which is where I wanted to start. That was dictated by ecological and climatic considerations. I knew in the west, the rivers would melt about a month sooner than in the east. So really that forced my hand. Some people asked me, they said, well, why don't you start in the east and go west? Well, it wasn't possible because in the east, those lakes and rivers are going to be frozen for a whole nother month because of the impact of Hudson Bay, right? Because it's so cold, it keeps those lakes frozen for much later. But I knew the Mackenzie River, for example, would melt by the end of May, and it would probably be ice-free by the end of May or June or so at the latest. So that meant a lot of extra time getting my canoe in the water, which time is everything on this journey where I'm racing against the calendar, I'm racing against the winter. And I knew other people, when they'd come up in the past with ideas for epic canoe journeys, had come up with the idea of, well, it doesn't have to be a single summer. This is going to be a 3-summer project where I'll do this section one summer, then I'll go back home, and then the next summer I'll go back to wherever I made it and start over, right?
Yeah.
And I knew people who had done that sort of thing, but it didn't really appeal to me. I thought that, it's not psychologically, it's just so different if you're actually going home and you have all the creature comforts. I really wanted it to be one continuous journey. So it was like, I'm going to give it my all, leave nothing behind, put everything on the table. And however far I get, that's what I'll do. So I honestly thought I only had about a 50-50 chance of getting all the way across. I thought, I might only get 2,000 kilometers because of the ice, the wind, or whatever else, but whatever. I'm just going to give it my all. You only live once, so I'll just try my hardest. So that's how I came up with the route that I did. And from where my starting point, it was just a matter of looking at satellite images, looking at topographic maps, measuring distances between bodies of water, trying to minimize the amount of portaging I would have to do, looking for, what direction does this river flow? What's going on here? Can I take this lake? That sort of thing. And getting all the way over to Baker Lake, which is a small Inuit community on an inland arm of Hudson Bay. And that would be my end point because, of course, once I got there, it's a little fly-in community. So it would be a relatively affordable place to end my journey where I could get on a commercial flight and come home. This, of course, was a major consideration for me because I was working within a small budget. So it's not like you can just draw a line on a map and say, I'm going to end my journey here because, well, where is here? What are you going to do? Use the satellite phone to call like a chartered flight to come and get you? Well, maybe if you have all the money in the world, you can do that. But if you don't, then you have to end somewhere where there's already a flight that you can simply hop on and come home on. So that's why I chose Baker Lake. as the most logical sort of ending point or the goal I had in mind. And then, of
Wow.
course, as my journey went on, as I was 3 months into it, I realized, oh man, the weather is really deteriorating. I'm facing big waves, white caps, high winds. I might not get to Baker Lake. I might be stranded here, and I might have to get picked up. And that's going to be really expensive. So I better keep pushing on. Gave me an extra motivation not to fail and to keep going.
It's all economics.
Well, partly that. Um, but I mean, there's something enjoyable that I think anyone can relate to about setting a goal and then working towards it. And it doesn't have to be a canoe journey, it could be anything with
Yeah.
sports, music, your house. Like maybe you're renovating your bathroom yourself and you want to do it all yourself and you're not a professional carpenter, but you watch some YouTube videos and you feel like you know what you're doing. There's certain satisfaction in just sort of setting a goal. You don't know whether or not you can pull it off, but you're going to give it your all, and just try to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. And you filmed and made a film of that trip too, right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I've always thought of myself as a writer first, and everything else secondary to that. So my focus was, if I live to tell the story, I'll write a book about this one day. But along the way, because I was conscious of the fact that I don't have a job, like this is how I make my living. I was like, I'm going to try to record as much footage as possible, in the hopes that maybe when it's done, I can make a documentary, which would help offset some of the costs I sunk into the expedition. So I did make a documentary in the end.
Hmm. Can people see that online anywhere?
Yes, they can. I think it's
Yeah.
available in various places, and I believe it might actually be on YouTube for free.
Okay.
So you could find it on there. But you can
What's
also, oh, I don't know.
what's the title of it?
Just Alone Across the Arctic, or if they
Okay.
simply search my name, Adam Shoalts, you
Yeah.
should be able to find it. I think it's on Amazon Prime, and I think it's on Apple TV as well.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
I think I saw that in Collingwood at the theater. I mean, as a photographer, I'm always wondering how'd you deal with charging your batteries?
I had a solar panel,
Okay.
little
Yeah.
tiny one. I
Yeah.
bought it just for that journey, so it was part of my budget. But it came from a company called Goal Zero, and I
Yeah.
would highly recommend it. Very, very effective little solar panel, like the size of a notebook, and you can charge your cameras like GoPros pretty effectively in full sun. Now, I think they say like it'll work even in the rain, but I never found that to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found even on a cloudy day, it doesn't charge very effectively at all.
Yeah.
But with full sun, it charges amazingly fast. So I used my cameras sparingly. Like I didn't turn them on unless I felt there was something worth recording, because I had to ration the batteries. The one good thing I had working in my favor is I was so far north that I had 24 hours of daylight. So especially for the first several months of my journey, the sun was still high in the sky, even in the middle of the night, that I could actually charge my camera equipment overnight as I slept. Now, later on in my trip, as I got later in the year, it was too dark to do that at night. And then it was a lot harder because I had to try to charge them during the day, but I was always on the move. And you want to be careful with a camera just lying in the open in a canoe with waves and things. I didn't want it to fall over. So I had to be a little more careful later on. But yeah, I would highly recommend those solar panels. They're really effective.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I have some Goal Zero stuff, and it's reliable, and I always like it for sure. And then so your latest published book, not the one that's coming up, but your latest published book is The Whisper on the Night Wind. I have not yet read that one. Can you tell us about that? What that one's all about?
Sure. The Whisper on the Night Wind is somewhat similar to my other books in that it's another canoe adventure in Canada's wilderness, but with a bit of a twist. It's a little bit different than any book I've written before. This one is actually more of a mystery book. It's perfect reading for October if you like the spooky season and Halloween, or just a creepy campfire story. This is the book for you. I already mentioned my love of history and the research I did on Canada's wilderness for my book of history, Canada in 10 Maps. Doing all that research, I'd kind of stumbled upon the occasional reference to creepy stuff that happened long ago deep in Canada's backcountry. Stories of unexplained tracks or sightings in the woods. But there was one I came across that was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. I was always a skeptic. I took these kind of campfire stories with a pretty big grain of salt. But there was something about this series of records from over a century ago that I happened upon that seemed to have a lot more substance to them. They had the ring of truth about them. It was clear that something had actually happened a century ago in this isolated fur trade post up in the mountains of Labrador. I didn't know exactly what that was. I thought there must be some kind of logical or rational explanation, but I was hooked on this mystery and I resolved to learn everything I possibly could about it, which ended up becoming the book, The Whisper on the Night Wind. So it deals with this isolated fur trade post way out in the mountains of Labrador. And I mean, Labrador a century ago was about as lonely a land as you could wish for. It would have felt like the ends of the earth. I mean, even today, it's a very remote and wild place. But I had uncovered a series of letters, journals, and diaries, all describing some sort of large animal or creature that have been sighted around this fur trade post there that no one could identify, not even experienced hunters who spent their lifetimes in the wilderness. And what intrigued me, because, maybe that in itself, well, no big deal, right? Like a Sasquatch story, that's a dime a dozen. And I wasn't particularly interested in that. But these stories were strikingly different. That was clearly not what was going on here. The way that they were describing the tracks, something suggestive of something totally different, like something that didn't belong there, as if something had escaped or washed up on the coast, or some sort of elaborate hoax. So I really wanted to delve into it. And what intrigued me even further when I did the research is that a lot of the accounts were made not just by lumberjacks or fur trappers, but by well-educated individuals with science backgrounds. There was a wildlife biologist, a couple of medical doctors, all of who made very detailed accounts. And this was also something that was quite striking, because most of the time when you're dealing with something that's this elusive from long ago, most of the material details have vanished into the mists of time. There's no possibility of cross-referencing accounts or really interrogating them or examining them from a sort of critical perspective like a detective would. But not so. In this case, there were numerous eyewitness accounts that were very detailed, and it opened the door to actually sort of cross-examining them and really digging into them to see what was happening there. So I did all the research I could in the historical records, in the archive. I found a lot of fascinating stuff that had never been published before. It hadn't seen the light of day. And when I had done all the research I could, I was starting to get a sort of theory or a hypothesis of what I thought might have been happening deep in the wilderness of Labrador a century ago. But after that, the paper trail went cold. There was nothing more I could learn in the archives or in the historical records. And I thought, well, I have a rough idea, but I'm not really all the way there yet. In order to unravel this mystery, or at least shed some light on it, I think I need to actually get my boots in my canoe and set off into the mountains of Labrador and try to retrace the roots of where this was happening, search for the ruins of the fur trade post where it all went down. Maybe if I can find it, put myself in their shoes, I may be able to finally shed some light on this mystery. And that's what I did. So that adventure into the mountains of Labrador and research became the basis for the book, The Whisper on the Night Wind, which is a true story, true history of a wilderness legend from deep in Canada's backcountry 100 years ago.
Cool. Wow. I'm excited to read that one.
Yes, I think in some ways is my best book.
Right. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Right on. So how old are you now?
I just turned 37.
Yeah. How much longer you think you can keep pushing yourself this hard?
Well, I don't know. I'm a parent. My son Thomas just turned 2,
Oh,
and
nice.
my wife is expecting again at the end of May. So having 2 children soon, that is definitely complicated disappearing into the wilderness for 4 months out of the year.
Yep. Yep.
But at the same time, I haven't made any plans to shift gears. I'm still doing long expeditions. My family is very supportive of that. My wife, she's very understanding. Sometimes she's the one that pushes me out the door. So I'm lucky in that regard. And I mean, in terms of the physical side of things, I don't know. I want to keep going for as long as I can. I sometimes think of it as like athletes, and where their career is sort of like when they're getting to the late 30s, that's when it really becomes more difficult. But I think if I'm careful and I plan effectively, I'll still be able to do these journeys, hopefully for many years to come. That's certainly my hope, but obviously no one can predict the future. So I'll continue to try to do them for as long as I'm able.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. So I mean, I'm a guy, I live in Ontario. I work at a place called Mountain Life, and I'm always getting grief for living in Ontario and working at a magazine called Mountain Life. So people like you make my job a little easier. We always need more Ontario badasses. Um, Lots of your adventures seem Eastern focused. Is there any sort of reason for that?
No, I've done many Western expeditions. I've done lately, just the last 2 years, I've been in the East quite a bit because my journey from Lake Erie took me up through the Eastern Arctic to Ungava Bay. But my biggest journey was my journey alone across the Arctic, which is Western Canada, because that was the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And just last year, I did an expedition in the Rockies to retrace the route of the great explorer David Thompson, which I'm hoping will become material for a future book. And I've also done many expeditions in British Columbia. In fact, a lot of my academic research when I was doing my PhD was based in British Columbia. So I was actually doing expeditions in British Columbia every year. And I've done many expeditions in the Yukon and in the Northwest Territories as well. So really, my focus is all of Canada, from Vancouver Island to Newfoundland, from Ellesmere Island to Pelee Island. There's really nowhere in Canada that I'm not fascinated by, that I don't love, and that I'm not happy to travel to. People ask me all the time, they say, well, would you ever do an expedition outside of Canada? And it's honestly very difficult for me to say yes to that because I feel like, Canada is so vast. Even if I live 10 lifetimes, I'd barely scratch the surface of all that's out there. It's just so huge. You can never hope to see it all. So with so much here, and so much effort it takes to sort of learn the trees, the plants, the wildlife, the berries, the mushrooms, to go abroad and basically be starting from scratch, is something that I feel like, maybe that's not the best use of my remaining time. I want to put all the effort into Canada that I can. Now, that said, I'm fascinated by the rest of the world as well. I love to explore it. Mostly that's where I do my armchair exploring, where I'll watch a documentary or read a book about someone doing some other expedition in some other corner of the world, and enjoy that vicariously. And maybe, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I can't say for certain what the future holds. So there's always the possibility that something unexpected happens and I get swept away into some adventure I never dreamed of. But for the immediate future, I'm very busy planning more expeditions for the years ahead, mostly in the Canadian Arctic, but all over the place. I have an expedition planned to the Northwest Territories, and I have another expedition planned back to Labrador for this year. So I have a lot on the horizon.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So you said, did you do the what's the book? The Falcon, Where the Falcon Flies? That trip was last summer?
Yep, just last summer. It was less than 12 months ago. So,
But you also said you did another trip last summer in BC just now?
oh yeah, that was in the fall though. So I
Oh,
finished yeah. So Where the Falcon Flies started April 24th. Like as soon
yeah.
as the ice melted and I was ready to go, I set off and I was done that journey by the 1st of August. So I had the remainder of the year to do more expeditions.
Wow. Wow. You do have an understanding wife.
Yes, I do. But technically, I mean, we never mentioned my title is actually Westaway Explorer in Residence
Okay.
at the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. So I've been explorer in residence the last 5 years, which I hesitated at because time flies. It feels like only yesterday, but it's hard to believe it's been 5 years. So as explorer in residence, I have a unique opportunity to do as many expeditions as I want, as I can jam in, and I'm sort of obligated to do that by the terms of my own contract. So yes, I can't really rest on my coattails and say, okay, it's August, I'm taking the rest of the year off. That's not how I look at it. I'm like, oh, there's still lots of time. Plan and mount another expedition here.
Cool. Cool. And so, I mean, what's your schedule at this point? You're planning more. I sounds like more than one expedition coming up.
Yes, I have at least two expeditions planned for this coming summer, fall. I am taking a little bit of time away when my wife gives birth for the newborn phase, especially since we have a toddler as well.
Yep.
But I am just finishing up the new book, selecting the photos. I'm excited. This new book of mine is going to include more color photos than any book I've published so far. I think we're going to have almost 50 color photos in this book. So I'm just
Awesome.
taking care of that. But yeah, before this year is out, I'll be back out in the wilderness on another adventure.
Anything you can tell us about or want to tell us
It's
about?
I can't tell you too much, but it is sort of like a history of Canada in 10 maps. I'm really hoping to do more historical research and write another history book. So to write another history book, I really believe that I have to go out there and retrace some of these routes, search for more archaeological sites. So I'm going to be switching gears, doing more of that sort of thing, looking for historic sites deep in Canada's backcountry in the hopes of writing another Canadian history book down the road.
Amazing. Cool. So what would you say to someone that wants to like be a do what you do for a living?
I think that uh, honestly, the most important thing I could tell anyone who'd want to do this sort of thing or really pursue any sort of unconventional career doesn't have to be an adventurer. I mean, if you want to become a professional musician, an artist, what have you, start your own business. Could be anything, right? Whatever, a doctor, whatever you want to do. I would say the single most valuable thing is enthusiasm. That has gotten me out of more tricky situations than anything else. I mean, at the end of the day, knowledge and expertise, practice, all of that will only get you so far. And what will really make the difference when you find yourself in dire straits or in a tough place is your enthusiasm. I mean, that's what's going to carry you the extra mile. That will count for more than anything else. It's kind of like how we started this conversation talking about doing adventures and expeditions on a shoestring budget without the proper gear, but saying, you can kind of turn a negative into a positive. And if you love what you're doing, if you're enthusiastic about it, it doesn't really matter. You're just going to keep going because that's what you love. So I would say, your passion and your enthusiasm at the end of the day is going to count for more than anything else. And not just following in these sort of footsteps, doing adventures, but really any career you could possibly dream up. It's your enthusiasm for that is going to make the difference in the end.
Solid advice for sure. You have anything else to add? Anything else you want to tell our listeners?
No, I mean we didn't mention, but my new book, Where the Falcon Flies, will be out in stores October 3rd. But you can already pre-order it. So if you are interested in it, if you go on my website or on Amazon or independent bookstores, you should already have the option to pre-order this book if you are interested in it.
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much, Adam. It's great to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure, anytime.
I'd like to thank Adam Shoalts for taking the time today. He sure is one hardcore dude. We'll be sure to keep you informed on all his upcoming adventures. Head over to adamshoalts.com. That's ADAMSHOALTS.com if you want to learn more. Thanks to Shirai Rules for the voiceovers in the intro, and to Adrian Gendro for the guitar licks. And thanks to you all for listening. Don't forget to check out the print editions of Mountain Life magazine. You can get a subscription over at mountainlifemedia.ca. Until next time, 2 wheels, 1 love. Peace.